Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I saw this and it annoyed the shit out of me. And typically I will have my regular channel to do this. I don't necessarily have my regular channel to do this. And so I would like to get it out. And so I'm going to get it out on this other channel. This bastardized version of the Progressive Soapbox. Let me make sure my volume is okay before I plow into this. Yes. Good. You know, it's funny. It feels like you're getting street cred in some weird way. Like you're in a prison, you're in a penalty box prison. And being in a penalty box prison, you're coming out with like prison tattoos and you have these little gold tear in your eye and you go back to the streets and you have all this additional credibility because you were put down by the man in this weird way. So I'm on Twitter. In a bit of a Twitter feud over the definition of escalation. Somebody doesn't know what that means. And as I perused the various articles that came up, one in particular caught my eye because I'm always amazed at some of the things that people say when they're on Twitter, like politicians. It's as if people don't have eyes and they don't have records and they don't have the capacity to use those eyes to check out those records. This is a tweet by Kamala Harris. I stand in solidarity with West Virginia teachers who are on strike demanding wages and health care. And she's putting an article saying, I live paycheck to paycheck. A West Virginia teacher explains why. Now look, ultimately what this boils down to is West Virginia teachers went on strike. They've been on strike for 7 days. They're trying to get just a basic 5% increase. They're 48th in the nation in regards to their pay. They're pushing back on this. People don't strike because they think it's fucking awesome to do. They strike because they feel they need to do it. So they're pushing back on this. They're trying to get better wages and higher pay. What does that have to do with Kamala Harris? And why is she tweeting this? And if you're telling me that you're standing in solidarity with unions, solidarity, brother, solidarity. If you're telling me this, then I need to think, and I need to have this honest feeling from you that you're there really in solidarity, that this is not political theater, because you can understand I could be somewhat cynical of politicians, and you should be somewhat cynical of politicians. Is there something to this, or is this purely political theater, meaning gesticulating in order to get to 2020, in order to run and get through the primaries? Is there something real to this? When you look at what she was advocating for, to be fair to Kamala Harris, she did say that by 2025, I believe, she wanted a $15 minimum wage. Would she would push that? Who knows? Obama wanted all sorts of stuff, hope and change and everything else. Democrats promise all sorts of things. The question is always, will they, can they deliver? Not even will they deliver or can they deliver. Will they even try? Would that be on the agenda to do? Or is that something that you're putting out there just for political gamesmanship? Knowing that at the moment of the campaign and when people are us against them, then for all intents and purposes, it's going to boil down to you have nowhere else to go. You have nowhere else to go. I looked at her record and so giving her $15 in 2020 something. Not necessarily what she wants, but what she did. Those things are different. Meaning when you're in a position of authority or when you're in a position to advocate for something because you were in some kind of position in your state, what were you advocating? Were you standing by workers? Were you standing by just human beings during those situations? While Kamala Harris was in California, one of the things that she thought was fucking awesome was instead of actually hiring workers to do certain jobs, she wanted to use inmates. Now think about that. Why would somebody choose an inmate over a worker? Meaning if I could hire somebody to do a particular job, the state of California, I'm giving you money, you're doing this particular task, because she could get them for cheaper. You can get, for all intents and purposes, near slave labor when you have somebody who's in prison and they can do those jobs. So instead of having to pay somebody a minimum wage or somebody a decent wage, fuck minimum wage, a decent wage, she could get by with 37 cents an hour or 42 cents an hour. I don't want to be unfair. It could be either one. This is LA Times. Most prisoners work now as groundskeepers, janitors, and prison kitchens with wages that range from 8 cents to 37 cents. I'm sorry, I overstated that. I said 42. It's 8 cents to 37 cents per hour. Lawyers for Attorney General Kamala Harris had argued in court that if forced to release these inmates early, prisons would lose an important labor pool. Essentially, and to explain what's going on, California's prisons were overcrowded. The judge ordered them to let some of those people out. California, or Kamala Harris's office, argued, if we let these people out, we're going to lose our labor pool. I mean, we're able to pay these people 8 to 32 cents an hour. If we have to actually hire workers, we can't really afford that. We don't really want to pay people. We're okay with the slave labor. Prison lawyers counted that the corrections department could hire public employees to do the work, but that's not the point. Yes, they could hire those people to do the work, but they couldn't pay them 8 to 32 cents an hour. If you're telling me about worker solidarity and you're trying to pay people 8 to 37 cents an hour, let's keep going. There's more. This one. This was just as gross. 30% of California forest fires are prisoners. Forest firefighters are prisoners. A handful of other states have similar programs, but California program is by far the largest, with roughly 4,000 participants. At its best, the program is a win-win situation. Win-win my ass. Inmates learn useful skills and spend time outside the normal confines of a prison. They're fighting fucking fires. What are you talking about? You're acting like this is the day at the spa. Yes, I understand they're getting out of a prison to fight fires. To fight goddamn fires. And this is the important point. Inmates learn useful skills and spend time outside the normal confines of prison, and collaboration with California Fire saves the state roughly $80 million a year. That's the end and beginning of it. It saves the state money. Participants make $2 a day in the program and $2 an hour when they're on a fire line. That may sound paltry, though it's not bad by prison standards. Many prison jobs bring in less than $1 per hour in addition to each day they work for the program. Now, the reason why I'm reading this is right here. Prison reform advocates have raised concerns that the state is so reliant on the cheap labor of inmate firefighters that policymakers may be slow to adopt prison reforms as a result. The concern was magnified last fall when lawyers for State Attorney General Kamala Harris argued that extending an early prison release program to all minimum custody inmates at this time would severely impact fire camp participation, a dangerous outcome for California since it's in the middle of a difficult fire season. I don't want to pay people. I don't want to give people a regular job, a job that they themselves can use. I instead want to use prison labor because I can get that prison labor for 8 to 32 cents an hour, or in other cases, if they're lucky, $2 an hour so they can go out and fight forest fires. Kamala Harris later on came back and said, I was disturbed by the statement that my office made, essentially insinuating that she had nothing to do with the statement that came out of her office. Okay. Seeing as the argument was there before talking about the other inmates, I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily believe that. Now, that being said, I don't want to get into other ones because the other ones are kind of off the point from a standpoint like citizen asset forfeiture or not being for body cameras and stuff like that. That's besides the point. Those are things that give me a particular perspective of her from the civil liberties standpoint, just by itself. And beyond that, there's a larger issue to this. Unions. Democrats have let unions wither on the goddamn vine. Literally, they've let unions wither on the vine. They looked at unions and told them they had nowhere else to go. And so a co-equal relationship at one point, where unions were working in tandem with Democrats in order to affect this kind of policy and legislation for the benefit of workers and by extension everyone else. That gets changed from co-equal partners to these guys have nowhere else to go. Republicans are batshit crazy. Republicans are going to go after them. They have nowhere else to go. We can do whatever we want. They will go out and support us because the other people are actively after them. Whereas at the very least, we will be blissfully or blissfully apathetic towards them. And that's been the way things have gone for the past 30, 40 years. They've let unions wither on the vine. Republicans have completely and assiduously attacked unions at every opportunity. And instead of Democrats bolstering unions during the off times of their attacks, they've let them wither on the vine. Obama had the opportunity to pass the Employee Free Choice Act. He didn't put it up. He didn't even try to push it. Didn't try to pass it. Essentially, the bill that would allow unions to form far easier than what they're forming now. And he wasn't going to dare push it. And on top of that, you're talking about NAFTA. You're talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Things that actively hurt workers and unions. The TPP that they were trying to pass, that would have gutted unions that much more, allowing for cheaper labor, undermining of environmental regulations, not to mention the undermining of the sovereignty of the United States in and of itself. This is what this party has been pushing. Don't be fooled by the shuck and jive of this type of flowery rhetoric. I stand in solidarity with West Virginia teachers who are on strike demanding better wages and health care. You stand in solidarity at a distance. You stand at a distance. Those people are out there on that line because they had no other choice but to go out on that line. That's the only way that they could affect any kind of real change in their lives. And they're not even asking for a lot. They're asking for a modicum. That's it. Just a small amount of something different to make their lives a little bit easier. That's what they have. They're using the tools that they have at their disposal in order to affect that change for healthcare and race. Something that the Democratic Party would have never backed them on. You stand with them in solidarity now. And when I'm saying wouldn't back them on, I'm talking about this idea of supporting unions in the way that you should support unions, seeing as the unions are one of your primary backers, or at the very least used to be one of your major benefactors. You've turned your back on these guys. You've turned your back on these guys for 40 years because you realized you didn't need to support unions because you were going to get their support regardless. I get annoyed by reading stuff like this. I stand in solidarity with West Virginia teachers who are on strike demanding better wages and health care. You're within the political space. They're using the tools that they have at their disposal to try to get change, meaning they're going on strike. They're pushing for those things. You're in the political space, meaning you and your party has the capacity, or had the capacity, to affect change, to affect them in far larger ways than what they themselves can do out there going on strike. If they had somebody in government actually representing their interests, if they had somebody actually pushing for an increase in the minimum wage, and again, not Johnny come lately pushing for 2024, 2025 or some insane time scale. I'm talking about actually representing their interests over the past 30, 40, 50 years. Not now that you need to get through the primaries. I'm talking about a party that actually represents the interests of workers and unions and wouldn't necessarily let these unions be left to their own devices in the way that they left them to their own devices. Being in solidarity at a distance is nice. Solidarity at a distance is nice. Anybody can do that. Anyone can put on some kind of theatrical performance and showing how awesome unions are and everything else. Brass tacks really boils down to, A, would you pass employee free choice? That's the first point. Will you make it easier to form unions in the United States, seeing as unions being this force to push for wages and everything else? Would you go beyond that? Meaning, if you're making the point that you're standing in solidarity with workers, would you go beyond that? Worker co-ops. Would you push for something that would allow people to form businesses without this aspect of the elite or corporate interests? Now, I already say that knowing full well that you are not going to be for that. And I have a hard time believing you'd be for the employee free choice. All of this stuff is done at a distance. If you're going to get a ton of money in order to run in an election, I can almost guarantee you will not be working in the interests of workers. And all of this talk about standing in solidarity, you need to pick your pony. You have a party that has plutocrats, and that party has workers. The workers in that party are stuck in somewhat of a weird quagmire of a situation, being completely beholden to the Democratic Party because they're terrified of what the other people are going to do. Now, I always make this case that you have dollars or pitchforks. You have one or the other. If workers are terrified and workers are scared of Republicans, then they're more willing to put up with the shit that Democrats do. That means you don't have pitchforks. If you don't have the pressure that these guys can be held accountable, meaning you can put these guys out on their ass. If you don't have that pressure associated with that particular apparatus, you allow the party to do whatever they want. You don't have pitchforks in this situation where you could essentially pressure them by having something else that you can vote for, another option on the table or on the menu. So only thing you have in this case is dollars. You have people giving these guys massive amounts of cash, and they lean to the side that give them massive amounts of cash. My issue here is the incentives for the Democratic Party has been up to this point to you have nowhere else to go. It doesn't matter what you bitch about. It doesn't matter what you moan about. It doesn't matter what you say. At the end of the day, you will tell your people to support us because the other people are insane. If you're taking huge amounts of cash, that's not changing. I just have a hard time believing that's going to change. You had the last president who was in there for 8 years. 8 years. And I know they like to boast about the economy and everything else. 95% of those jobs were part-time or low income. 95%. 95% of the gains went to the top 1%. And you could make a case that Trump was going to best that, but the best that he can best that by is 5% just from the basics of math. I'm saying this party has not done you a service. Do not buy into the garbage that these guys are selling. Don't buy into the garbage they're selling. Let's see if anybody's here. And by the way, she will be Obama 2.0. I mean, the rhetoric, the cadence, all that stuff comes across as Obama 2.0. Are there any jobs that you would advocate for prisoners to do? It depends on if they're going to get paid for them. I don't like this paying somebody 8 cents for labor. It's almost like slave labor. It's almost like slave labor. I don't like it. There's no attempt made at rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is not on the menu. I mean, the argument that they're making for California is, hey, this program is awesome because, you know, we could pay this guy 8 cents an hour. Yeah, I bet it is awesome for the fucking state of California where you can pay somebody 8 cents an hour. It would be awesome for any boss to be able to pay their worker 8 cents an hour. That's not the goddamn point. You're 8 cents away from slave labor. I mean, think about that. That's for all intents and purposes what we're talking about. 8 cents away from slave labor. Yeah, I don't like it. Prisoners don't pay room and board. Well, they don't necessarily want to be there. So no, they're not paying room and board. Not so much. Yeah, look, that prisoner doesn't necessarily want to be in that jail. And once you add into private prisons and all this stuff into the mix, it is abysmal that you're paying somebody 8 cents an hour for a task. And if you have the capacity to hire somebody to actually do that job, you hire a person to do that job. Now, if you're asking me what jobs can prisoners do, I don't think I have any issue with prisoners doing work or labor. I think my issue is that they should be paid for the labor. That's all. 8 cents an hour is insane. That's insane. I mean, that's essentially the state just raping that particular inmate. Add to the fact that most of these people are in for drug crimes. Think about that. Like, I'm trying to get across this thing of you're putting people in prison for horrible reasons. You have a prison state. You have 5% of the world's population with 25% of that population in those prisons. And B, on top of that, for something that they shouldn't even be in prison for in the first place, you're adding in slave labor to the mix, or close to slave labor. 8 cent difference or 32 cent difference. Yeah, I don't see that at all. I don't see that at all. I don't like that. Prisoners should make $15 an hour. You think they should make 8 cents? You think they should make 8 cents an hour? You're 8 cents away from slave labor. That should be your caption when you tweet this out. That's pretty much. J. Scott, I see both sides. I don't believe in exploitation. You don't believe in exploitation. Sounds like you do. But they could be working services they can provide. Yeah, but 8 cents an hour. I mean, that's literally exploitation. If you don't believe in exploitation, I don't get the issue here. Strip search and have someone make you spread your cheeks on a daily basis. Oh, geez. Not to mention, again, you're also skirting away from this idea of should those people be in prison in the first place? Somebody gets caught for pot. Most of the people who are in prison are there for drug crimes, not violent crimes. They're there for drug crimes. You have a country that puts people in prison at a prolific rate. We have more people in our prisons than China. China has 3 times our population. So, A, you have this kind of industrial prison complex where you're putting people in prison for ridiculous reasons. B, you have a society that drives that prison population. Whether you want to talk about just a violent society or whether you want to talk about the pressures that are built into the society or not having a safety net. You have drivers that creates that prison population in the first place. And C, then you turn around and say, okay, now we're going to pay you 8 cents an hour. For whatever reason, because we're giving you room and board in a place that you don't want to necessarily be room and boarded, and we're paying for security in a place that you don't necessarily want to have the security. Yeah, I don't buy that. Whatever they're getting paid, it shouldn't be 8 cents. And even if you make the argument that it shouldn't be $15 an hour, it should not be 8 cents. Damn sure it shouldn't be 8 cents. Do you know that Hillary has slave labor in Arkansas governor mansion? She wrote about it in her book, but it was never thrown in her face by Bernie in the primaries. More sheepdogging by Bernie. How did Bernie Sanders get into this? Of all the people who we're talking about, Sanders would, that would be the guy who's on the picket line marching with these guys. Well, Bernie Sanders. Wages circle back into the economy. It is different, ally. Prison labor should be the current minimum wage average, like $6 to $8 minimum wage should be 5. Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, I can kind of see the argument if somebody says we don't want to have to pay $15 an hour for prison wage or something to that effect. 8 cents is insane. Like even if we can come to some kind of come to a number in some way, even that number is going to be somewhat subjective, but it should at least be the minimum wage. I mean, come on. You give up your rights as a person. They put you in a prison, they put you in a cage, and they say, well, by the virtue of you being in this cage, now we can make you work for 8 cents an hour. Yeah, fuck that, man. Fuck that. I don't like that at all. They're human beings. And some of these people have wives and husbands and families and everything else, and those people lose revenue once those people get put in prison. And again, we're skirting around this thing, acting like everybody who's in prison is supposed to be in prison or should be in prison. That's fucking insane. That's insane to believe. That's insane to believe. And even still, whether they should or shouldn't be in prison, you still get to this thing of they're giving up somewhat of a life being in prison. And assume for the moment the worst. Assume the person did something that earned them a spot in prison. Assume the worst. Because I can, in my head, when I'm thinking about this, I think from the standpoint of drug crimes. Somebody gets, I don't think from the standpoint of violent crimes. I think most people who get put in prison are due for drugs. So I think of this person is doing some non-violent crime and this person gets put in prison. Assume the worst, though. Assume that the person did do something pretty ghastly and gets put in prison in this capacity. Even still, they should make minimum wage. Like, I don't know why that changes the equation. I don't know why that changes anything. They should make minimum wage, whatever minimum wage is. 8 cents an hour is insanity. 8 cents away from slave labor. 8 cents away from slave labor is right. Not talking about people locked up for BS. How can you not talk about people locked up for BS? I mean, okay, fair enough. So let's say I take those people away. Let's say I take away the people who locked up for BS. You can't exclude those people because those people are still stuck with the same conditions that you're talking about for anybody else. But take them away for the moment. Even talking about non-BS, whatever that non-BS thing is. So you have a problem with community service that is free. I don't have a problem with... I get your point. You're trying to make this case of community service is slave labor. No, they're making a choice for the community service. I mean, ultimately, they're trying to keep themselves out of prison. And you can make a case for the slave labor is the same. The 8 cents an hour away from slave labor is the same. People do whatever they need to do to try to keep themselves out of a prison cell. You can say those people get a choice between a community service and not. Like I said, my issue here is not the work itself. My issue here is they're not compensated for the work. The community service thing, I guess you can make a case that says community service is not It's not really the same. I mean, the person A is not in prison. That's the first part. They're not in a cage. They're not getting their ass cheeks checked every time the person does point A to point B. The person is out on their own recognizance doing some particular service, as opposed to being locked in a fucking cage cell. And your entire reality is dictated by the guards and the people who hold you under lock and key with a gun that can shoot you in the face. Your life is under their hands, and they're saying, we want you to do this work for 8 cents an hour. Can you protest? Can you bitch? Can you get better conditions? You can't do any of that stuff. I mean, you lose your rights. I guess that's my point with this. The community service, I think, is a decent argument in the sense of, should people do community service and if they're not getting compensated for the community service? The whole point of, I guess, the community service argument is they're doing it because they're trying to make up for something they did in their society. I don't think the whole point of the slave labor or the 8 cents away from slave labor was to make up for anything they did in their society. I mean, that point was just labor. We get cheap, dirt cheap labor. We get to exploit the fact that these people are in prison. I think there's a difference. Did the CIA bring cocaine to black communities? I heard that answer is yes. There aren't guns. We just had a can of pepper spray. Pay prisoners with remission, not with a pittance. Remission costs society less, but is valued by the prisoner. Yes, but you're still stuck with that thing of, you put people in a cage. Their entire reality is dictated by the people who own that particular cage. And the people who own that cage are saying, we're going to get you to work for 8 cents an hour. That person could say no, or that person could say, I need to earn something in order to pay for the things that I want to get. Maybe they don't have outside support for whatever reason. And they decide, yes, I am going to work because that's all I have, even though if I'm only making 8 cents an hour. I'm saying 8 cents an hour versus a slave wage. It's only an 8 cent difference between those things. Literally, there is only an 8 cent difference between those things. They're not doing that job in order to make up to their society. And I think that's the difference between community service versus prison labor. The prison labor thing is not done because they're getting some, we're helping out society in some particular way. No, they're doing that because they can save money. Meaning the state of California is doing it purely with this idea of saving money. This stuff isn't helping the community or anything else from that standpoint, unless you want to say that the community is the state of California saving a shitload on labor by using prisoners to fight fires or getting prisoners for 8 cents an hour to do work. Having a supermodel pick up trash on the side of the street is literally community service. I think that's the difference between those things. That supermodel is not locked in a cage and is not at the whims of the people who are in that cage. Yeah, I think it's different. Work requirements tied to early release, calculated fairly with that work. Oh, dude, this is like the train issue. Like, the whole thing of fair becomes subjective. Yeah, fair is subjective. It's too hard. Like, I can only say what would work for me, meaning what I would agree with on this. I would give it a few agreements. 8 cents is exploitation. That's just outright exploitation. I'm sorry. That's way over the top. If someone wants to say $15 an hour is too much, okay. I still think it should be pegged to the minimum wage. If the state says, we're not going to pay you, but we're going to let you out early. Oh, man, I am bugged the shit by that because it still ends up in this situation where it feels like you're working. Or if they gave the option, like they said, we could either pay you or we could either let you out early. I don't know. I'm spitballing. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Work requirements calculated early release, and then it becomes what does fair mean in this case? Yeah, man, I'm not sure. But Jay Scott, that's a good point. I got to be honest. I hadn't thought of the work release program, not the work release, the community service. But I think that's the difference. I could be wrong on this, but I think that's the difference. One, the person is in jail, the other one is not. I'm focusing on that because I think that's the strongest point that you've made between those two things. So, Let's see. The entire prison system was working by design. It's all corporate handout. Yeah, in that picture, she looks like an Obama ventriloquist dummy. That's funny. An Obama ventriloquist. All I want to make the point is, remember hope and change. Remember hope and change. And did you get hope and change? Or did you get somebody who gave 95% of the wealth to the top 1%? Did you get somebody who put all these Citigroup people in his administration? Did you get somebody who protected the houses or protected the banks while allowing homeowners to go bust? Did you get somebody pushing like nobody's business for the TPP and expanding the surveillance state? I'm asking you, what did you get versus what the person said? Even with the healthcare that the person put out, talking about a public option, that went away in a heartbeat. Did you get somebody who was willing to gut Social Security? All I'm saying is, they would say whatever they need to say to get into office, understanding that you have nowhere else to go. At some point, you need to say, I might not have anywhere else to go, but I'm not going with you. So, let's see. Every time I see a video, I pop in 30-minute in. Oh, yeah, that sucks. This was an interesting topic, Garden. Yeah, Jay made a damn good point. I mean, he made a fucking interesting point. And I guess the more I think about it, it's harder to... I guess there's more context that gets added into that. I guess my feeling is, I don't like people being exploited. And because I don't like people being exploited, even from the standpoint of the weakest of us, meaning slave labor or prison labor, if you're paying somebody 8 cents, I mean, come on, man, fucking hell. But by the same token, I could see the argument of, well, what if they give some kind of alteration between the amount of time the person get off, early release, and everything else? I guess that stuff could be negotiated and come up with some kind of reasonable solution, even if the person chooses which one they want more. But can we at least agree that 8 cents an hour is fucking abysmal and obscene? And the idea that Kamala Harris would argue for something like that, or her office will argue for something like that, is obscene. It's obscene. Screaming about workers now is, too little too late. So. Screw that little bastard. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. That's funny. All right, I'm going to end this. My wife is pushing for us to go somewhere. Shit. My wife is pushing for us to go somewhere. Guys, good conversation. I really wish I had my other channel, because we could have had like 100 and some people here having this conversation. And my heart goes out to prisoners, I guess, because I feel like I'm in my own little penalty box prison. I'm gonna get a tattoo of a tear and all this other stuff. Come back to my regular channel with credibility. But nevertheless, I'm gonna end this. All right, guys. Thank you for showing up at this weird particular location. They're taking for fucking ever with that appeal. They're taking for fucking ever with that appeal. And what makes it so bad, one of the articles came out showing that they were fucking up. They brought a lot of new people onto YouTube, and they were fucking up with some of the appeal processes, meaning there were channels that they were either turning off or turning back on, removing some of the content, bringing some of the content back. It's aggravating. It's aggravating. The idea that you are associated with a company, but you have no power over the decisions that company makes. And that company overnight could say, we're going to change our algorithm. We're going to change our rule. We're going to change some kind of terms of service. In a whim. In a whim. It's fucking amazing. All right. I'm not going to bitch. All right, guys. I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for showing up. Jay Scott, good pushback on this. All right, guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone.